opening. And then settle into your seat. Close your eyes. This moment at the beginning and then the moment again at the end are significant moments in that they articulate the transition from the other parts of our evening, of our day, to this space and time. So as you close your eyes, just recognize that you're shifting into a mode of receiving and articulating that may be slightly different than how you interact during the rest of your day. Maybe not. Come into the body, noticing the way you're sitting on your seat. Notice the breath inside the body, and then adjust your way that serves ease in the body and in the breath. Bring your attention into your center, into the space at the core of you, your heart. And then with your next exhalation, join your hands together in front of your heart. And with the intention to receive the teachings from the space of the heart, and to speak and share and question and contemplate and respectively challenge from the seat of the heart. We'll initiate this time with one Om. Take a full breath in. Bow your head for a moment over to your heart. And then release your hands. Lift your head. Gently open your eyes. Say a little bit by way of introduction, and then I want to open the time for thoughts and comments and shares from you as you've spent some time with this passage. So, mystics, sages of all speak of experiences of oneness, of non-separation between themselves and the world around them, and from the creative force that is creating everything that we find around us. And those experiences and then the understandings that arise from those experiences transcend the particular faith traditions out of which the person, if they were connected to a faith tradition to begin with. And as a consequence, those experiences and the understandings that arose from those experiences are useful and apply to all of the non-dual traditions. The passage we're looking at tonight is a section, and it's not a direct section, it's pieces from a text called Thunder Perfect Mind, which is one of a collection of texts known as the Nag Hammadi scrolls, and they are writings, non-dual writings from the Christian tradition that were discovered in 1945 and are being translated and worked with and informing the understanding of non-duality, of no separateness or of one, that perspective. And they also have, as a consequence of being a non-dual text, this has direct relevance and can be interpreted from the lens of the non-dual tantric lineage as well. So I just wanted to set that context a little bit before we move into the text. And I found this in a section called the Book of Longings, written by Sue Monk Kidd, and it's in the foreword or the opening pages of the book, and it really struck me, and I find it a very beautiful passage. So I'm really excited for us to look at it and talk about it a bit more. So with that in mind, I'm curious to hear if you have thoughts or questions, or perspectives from your couple of days with this material, with this text. So feel free to unmute yourself and to share. Tina, you want to go first?
Yeah, I had a very visceral reaction to it, and I think I was angry. One thing I was angry was, okay, if this is non-dual, why is it first and last, core and virgin, this and that? Always one extreme. And that made me think, well, it's like saying, don't think about an elephant. So it kind of made me mad. And then I got mad, I don't know, when I saw like the whore and the whore. I don't know, I haven't dove into it, but I became aware of, in Nigeria, there was a series of rapes going on, and so if you say, like, is this text not encouraging men to exert power over women by words such as whore? And why is a woman a whore and there's no such men? Like, I think I had heard about that through social media a bit without going to look more about it because I didn't want to really know more about it. But yeah, so I found it very disturbing, and then try to calm down and see what else is there. But I don't know, I'm left with that reaction.
Yeah, and yeah.
So I go many sessions without saying much. If it's non-dual, why is it put in context of one extreme and the other? What about everything else in between? I didn't see any subtlety in that.
Yeah. And I'm just curious. So you're raising really a very significant question, which is, if oneness is the kind of core principle, how come there are these extremes, and especially extremes that, indicate areas where we struggle and are where there's differentials and and those very apparent differences and stratuses and that's a really, really significant and one that we'll talk more about for sure. I just want to come to the line that follows those dichotomies and the line that is, I am she. And I'm wondering how that resonated for you.
Well, again, like we had talked a bit about the goddess, like how earth creation is often feminine, but in this, like I know it says at the end, like don't be afraid of my power, but to me, the way it was worded, maybe it's a translation problem from the original text, but to me, it to take the feminine power more than affirm it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just saying that it is she, I don't know. I had trouble to sweep away what the reaction that the initial lines brought up to within me.
Yeah, perfect. As in, I completely understand that. Not perfect as in that's the way you feel, but yes, that makes sense. Kathy or Virginie, do you have shares around that first section of the first 5 lines or so and how that resonated with you in terms of what Tina is sharing?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about my reaction to the first 5 lines. The first 5 lines actually were the first line and then the next 4 lines grouped together, because the first line is I am the first and the last, and that's the sentence that you can find in the Bible in Revelations, and it is meant by to most Christians anyway to mean that Jesus has always existed from eternity and that he will always exist. So if you transpose that to the goddess, it means that the goddess has always existed and will always exist. And she's the first and she's the last. And the dichotomies of being honored and mocked, a whore, a holy wife and a virgin, a mother and a daughter. When you try to hold that, to hold those contradictions in your mind is unable to actually hold them together and make sense of them because they are so opposite to each other. So it kind of checkmates the mind into not being able to answer or understand what it means. And it forces you to go to another type of knowledge or understanding to be able to resolve the seeming paradox of the dichotomies being presented. And so I think it's a bit like a koan where it tries to break the ego of the person, of the reader, to go deeper into the heart of her heart, to understand what it actually means to be the two opposites of the same thing. So those were that was my reflection on the first 5 lines, and then the proclamation of I am she being everything, and in this case, is and being essentially repeating like a bit of a refrain, the first line of I am the first and the last. I am she.
Yeah. How does that sit, Tina, for you? Not that it has to, shift anything or make any difference. I'm just curious.
I feel that I understood that was the intent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and like through other texts we have looked at where something is hard to reconcile and it's opposites. I just found it interesting that I've never had such a reaction as I did this time. So
yeah,
I understand that that's probably where they're going with the text, or where what that's meant to evoke. But for some reason, it like short-circuited another way, or I don't know. Maybe it's another passage to some different kind of illumination. Maybe that's a different path. That would be there, but anyway, I still find it disturbing, but I recognize that was the kind of what Gershon said, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. That is trying to get below that part of the mind that wants to categorize and articulate those extreme differences. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are a couple of other pieces that I want to talk about in reference to what you're saying as well, Tina, but Kathy, I want to check in and see if there's resonance there in those first few lines for you.
Complete reaction to Tina, where I also had a visceral reaction, but I loved it. So like what Virginie was saying, I am the first and I am the last. To me, that's a summary of everything we've been talking about for the last 5 weeks. You start with the ocean and you end with the ocean. Whatever happens in the middle, you always go back to the ocean, the goddess, whatever the thing is. That it's that circle, and the first and the last, and then when you have the ending, then it means it's the beginning of the next thing. And then with the I am, with the split, it's the and in there that I love so much, because having been raised, and I guess we've all were raised in different ways and this being drilled into us, that we had to be one or the other. It was the or. You were a whore or you were holy. You weren't the two. You were either, I come from a Catholic background, so either you're the Virgin Mary or you're Mary Magdalene, who was thought to be a prostitute, but that's a whole other. But like you're one or the other. You can't be both. You're the good girl or you're the bad girl. And it was always or, and it was only, I've sort of struggled with this off and on through the years, and it was only about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago during I guess it was in the fall, I sort of had this, I don't know, whatever integrated for me, and I actually had written a poem that was very similar to this, where I had written all my own personal dichotomies and how I am, and it's not, I'm not an either or. And so then when I read this, and there's another book, I mentioned to you, Mona, that Mary Magdalene revealed, that has a quote from this same text, and it actually has a few quotes from this text. And so as soon as I saw that, and I had just written the poem myself, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I was just saying with it. It's not one or the other. But also, if you go back in mythology, like really ancient mythology, if you look at Isis, she was both the mother of Horus, she gave birth to him, and she was the lover who resurrected him. Like she wasn't one or the other. She was both, and you didn't have to be one or the other. So again, like Virginie said, that I am she again sort of underlines that I'm not that I'm. It's saying I am she all takes the two parts and sticks them back together. It's like a Lego or something. It sort of puts it all back together in wholeness, and I find so exciting and encouraging, and sort of has, there we go. Babbling. That's where I go.
I really love that, pointing out the and. I didn't really consider the significance of how that and changes the context of those sentences in the same way, or in the way like an or would be a very different reading of that passage. In sitting with this also, I just want to confirm that, and I know we know this, but just to articulate it, that we're able to use different language for the same kind of thing. So whether we say oneness or creator or God or goddess, we're talking about that kind of totality. And in the previous 5 talks, that totality was called Shiva. And so here, when it's I, is a way of saying that totality, right? I am the first and the last. I am that totality. I am it all. And as Virginie was saying, the mind, which is not the totality of ourness, of our being, but we can come to see it as a significant part. It really likes to, and its job is to categorize, right? It's to say food that's healthy, food that's poison. Like, when we were hunter-gatherers, it distinguished what was safe and edible and what was harmful and causing death. So, it's been very important for us to have this mind that can differentiate between something that's harmful and something that's helpful, that can differentiate between pants that we put on our legs and a shirt that we put over our torso. And it can be so tempting to then the mind's natural gift to discriminate and to distinguish between these things is real. And one of the questions that I was considering in looking at these first 5 lines, so if we take the first line to say it is the totality, and if we take the 6th line, it's the totality, I am the first and the last, and then I am she, which is back to the totality. And then that came up for me is like, what is the difference between one who is honored and one who is mocked? And what is the difference between the whore and the holy woman? Like, really, what makes that distinction? And it's a label and a judgment that we put on ourselves or that we put on somebody else that has nothing to do with the I-ness, the totality, the goddess that is everything. And yet it's so hard to recognize that because we trust that mind that can tell us this is a healthy thing to eat and this is poison and we shouldn't eat it. So why believe it when saying that this is a person who needs to be honored and this is a person who needs to be mocked, or this is a good person and this is a bad person? So that, recognition of where the mind is useful and where it's limited, I think, is one of the things that came up for me in those lines of distinction, or of dichotomy, rather. The underlying piece of this is in the classical tantric understanding of non-duality or of oneness, that oneness, the goddess, is completely free. And so as a completely free being, entity, power, force, we have to be completely open to every single possibility that she can create. So we can't say we can only have good, or we can only have things that we like and not things that we don't like, because she is really free. So we get to have experiences that are delicious and tasty and experiences that are not, and that's part of that full spectrum. So here we're saying, like possibly this verse is saying, we've got this whole spectrum, and on one end is this and on one end is that, and we get to have the entire taste of that, even if it's bitter and disgusting and awful and it doesn't make any sense and it creates suffering. Even though that's the case, it is one of the tastes available in the world, one of the infinite range of possibilities that are beyond the limited number of tastes that we can perceive, but in that sense. And that if not completely free in this way, then we would have a very limited experience, which ultimately means that there's no oneness. It's constricted or constrained and completely open to possibility. And I think, Tina, in your response to this, this section of this verse, you're really highlighting something that we all have to somehow come to terms with, or that's one of the things that I hear, which is that, like, why is there terrible things in the world? Why is there intense suffering? Why is there rape? Why are we not just having the labels? So why are we having these labels? But why are also these experiences? Why did the world? Why was there and is there mass devastation? Why is there a virus? And the answer from the tradition heads around and make peace with is that because there's infinite openness for every single possibility, and that's really uncomfortable, despite being perhaps also incredibly enticing, right? To be like, wow, that kind of freedom. How could I have that kind of freedom to be anything and everything that I want? Even if some experience is not pleasant. So those are some of my thoughts about those first few lines. Any thoughts or responses, Kathy?
I will just add that you bring up the idea of judgment, and that sort of, and you talk about the goddess being freedom, and in some ways that judgment is what then becomes the instrument of control, right? So that if you think of like the patriarchy, for lack of a better word, right? Or even just how man, and I mean man as in humans, have evolved, right? So that humans became separated from nature, and then man became separated from woman, and now this is pieces where woman is divided within herself. It's that whole idea of divide and conquer, right? Like, so that if you make that separation, then you're more easily able to control people. But then I guess, again, what I was saying about putting it all back together again, even though you're having to deal with the good and the bad, you're still gives you that freedom because you've got the whole picture again. And which I guess leads into the next part, which is the taking back of the power, being that whole, instead of dividing and conquering, you say, oh no, this is me, and taking back the power.
Yeah, exactly. And just to highlight that piece a little bit more fully, that this is a recognition that there's nothing that inside us that's not okay. Like, there might be parts of us, which we've, talked about in sessions in some way, but there's nothing that needs to be eradicated or banished or gotten rid of in our self. That there are aspects of our reactions that are not necessarily the truth of who we are, and we want to line that more and more. But that doesn't mean that if there's something that we don't like about ourselves, we have to get rid of it. In fact, often the suggestion is that we need to love that part more and bring it back into the whole, instead of separating it and blocking it off, to enclose it and welcome it and move it closer to the center, and then it kind of dissolves its unpleasantness or the ideas that we have against it. I think that was clearer in my head than it just... Anyway. Good. Any other thoughts or comments around this first section?
I just want to say how striking it is for me to the preposition "and" is in the sentence. You could have taken a poem like Thich Nhat Hanh, "Call Me by My True Names," and where he specifically takes the positive and then the most negative and attributes that to the oneness. So you could have done the same here and said, "I am the whore, period," and then next sentence, "holy woman, period." But that would not have the same effect on the mind. The mind would be able to understand each sentence and actually be able to identify with each one and become that for in the instant that it read it. The mind could easily become the holy woman or the whore. But if you put the "and" in between, then it is impossible for the mind to reconcile the two together in one instant at the same time. And that kind of makes the mind in limbo and is unable to reconcile what the sentence is saying. And that in turn breaks the heart of compassion open, which then allows you for an opening of non-judgmental compassion towards everyone, towards everything. And it reconciles the emotions that the oneness is manifest in all of its form, but it's out of love, not out of hatred or not out of disgust or out of a negative emotion. It just manifests completely out of love, with the joy of seeing itself in its multitude, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And to add one piece to that, not be necessary, but just to also articulate that for me, it's been very easy to dissolve the judgments on the others, to say I don't need to call this person holy and this person whore or whatever they are. It's much harder to turn that back on myself and to say so which parts of me do I label in the same way as whore, mean put up blocks against, don't want to acknowledge, exist, but that capacity within me, and as well as to be holy, not just in the sense of my essence is pure, but also holy in the way that holier than thou, and wanting to kind of put myself up on the pedestal, and how to reconcile that within is has been for me, or it's an ongoing process, it hasn't finished, is really where the compassion rubber meets the road, that it's so much easier to direct that outward for me. So just as you were speaking about that, the heart of compassion breaking open for others, it's also that the heart of compassion breaks open for ourselves, and that we recognize all of those potentials in ourselves, and also the way that we set up these judgments and harsh lines within ourselves around what is permissible and what is not permissible. I had for a long time, I'm going to say this and then I'll end. For a long time, I really struggled with the word wild, especially like it got very popular in terms of like as an adjective for women, like a wild woman. And I was like, oh, this is disgusting. I don't like this. I had your visceral reaction, Tina, to that combination often. And so I've really sat with that and contemplated where that response came from. And in thinking about wild in terms of like an animal that is wild is an animal that's completely free. It's not tamed. It's not put in a series of constraints that lock it into a way of behaving that is dictated by the external circumstances. And I think that that's kind of a little bit what these lines also say, is that, you know, we don't dictated by these external circumstances that lock us into constraints where we're one or the other, as you were saying, Kathy, and we can find that not just the place in the middle, but that we are all of it, and we are the ends of the spectrum as well as the middles of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, any thoughts or comments about that? So I was thinking that we might continue this next week, that this passage might ask for 2 conversations. I think the second half of the passage, and especially the last 2 lines, are really potent and a little more mysterious. This was very rich and profound and deep, but that there's a lot of resonance in the last couple of lines. So I suggest that we move into practice now, and we take another week and sit especially with those last couple of lines. How does that sound? So in one way that we could work with for our practice tonight is to, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, but to look at the breath cycle and to recognize that the inhale and the exhale are those kind of that they're a dichotomous pair, that one is filling and draws in and the other is outward and releasing. And the tradition, the yoga tradition, says that the points of potency in particular are where the inhalation meets the exhale and where the exhale meets the inhale. And so those are the places where the ends of the spectrum come together. And the tradition says that that place is in our center, that in the center of us is where the breath in ends and where the exhalation begins. Depending on the tradition, it also says that's where the exhalation ends and the inhalation begins. In other traditions, it's the crown of the head. We're not going to pay much attention to that. We're going to use the inhale into the center of the heart, exhale out, and maybe pause in that space in between the inhale and the exhale to feel into the center that's between the ends of the spectrum of opposites. Okay, so with that in mind, Yep. And to your seat, close your eyes. Take the first few moments, let yourself move into stillness and notice the breath and adjust your seat in any way that brings more ease in the body and in the breath. Completely relax the face and in particular the jaw and the eyes. Relax as much as possible. And notice that as you relax, the breath begins to become more subtle. But don't worry about that if it's not happening or feel like you have to make that happen. Now, very simply, as the body settles, begin to trace the movement of the inhale in and down, and follow the inhale until its end and locate that physically. Watch the exhale from that same location and move up and out. Take several breaths to really just become clearer on the felt sense of the place where the inhalation ends and the exhalation begins. perhaps, as you continue to trace the breath in, down to the center where it ends, and watch the exhalation rise up and out from that location. Perhaps invite a subtle pause between the end of the breath in and the beginning of the breath out. Notice if that pause, that slightly extended pause, adds tension. And if it does, consider shortening it or letting it move back to the natural, very slight pause between the top of the inhale and the bottom of the exhale. Gradually let go of the tracing of the inhale and the exhale and the lengthening of the pause. As you let your awareness rest steadily in, even as the breath moves in and out. see if there's a feeling the center of you can expand outward in all directions, encompassing the totality of all that is seen and unseen around you, as well as inside you. So that instead of feeling into the heart inside you, you're feeling into the heart of which you are in. Without losing the sense that you are in the heart of the One. Deepen your breath. With your next exhale, join your hands together at your heart. The heart that is inside you and the heart that is holding everything. We'll seal this with one Om. Take a breath in. Bow your head to your heart. Release your hands. Lift your head. And gently open your eyes.